Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, just to tell you a little bit about our Patreon, we have a weekly bonus episode when you sign up for as little as $1 a month, and you get a weekly episode of all my rundowns of everything I'm watching that week. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I've got a returning voice on the podcast. I've got Danny Hercules. Say hi, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
Hey, and you've been on the show a few times, usually covering musicals.
Well, actually, I think the last two were not musicals; they're original movies that had been later adapted into Broadway musicals. But this is the first
Oh,
time,
you're right. I think
right?
that's why I'm thinking of them as
Yes.
musicals, like the Waitress
Well,
one that we covered.
yeah, Waitress and Elf, and also I did Xanadu, which was an original movie that had music, had songs in it that was later also turned into a full-fledged Broadway musical.
Okay, well, I'm completely wrong, but at least, well, did Waitress have any music in the movie? I can't remember now.
Well, it had score and it had the one song that she sings,
That's right.
"Baby
Okay, I
Don't You
think that's
Cry,"
what I must be thinking of then.
which was
But
not in the play.
okay. Well, it tells you how much I know about musicals, huh?
That's okay. So this is the first time I'll be talking about an actual Broadway musical that was adapted into a movie.
Okay. Well, at
So
least the other movies had that musical connection, which must
yes.
must have been what I was thinking of. Well, I guess we better not tease it too much more. Let me just say real quick, Danny, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit before we jump into the movie.
Uh, I've got really not much that to say about myself. I have written screenplays. I've written a novel. I have a series of ebooks, Kindle books about screenwriting called Script Tips. And when I was in high school, I was in musical theater. And I also had joined in the 2010s, I joined a workshop in Los Angeles called the Academy for New Musical Theater, where I learned more about writing musicals. And I had a few produced, one at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. And so I kind of reawakened my interest in musicals. I guess that's why I keep picking musicals or musical related things to talk about.
Nice. Well, I encourage listeners to go listen to our other episodes like Elf, Waitress, and the first one was
Xanadu.
Xanadu. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead and listen to those. And my guest always picks the movie. So what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Well, because it's the 4th of July, we're going to talk about 1776, otherwise known as the prequel to Hamilton.
Yeah, I was thinking about Hamilton while I was watching this.
Hmm.
um, let's also give a quick summary of the movie. So if you haven't seen it before, I mean, I guess you kind of know what's going to happen because you know history. Hopefully, you know history well enough to know what's going to happen in this movie. But if not, here is a brief synopsis of it. The nation's fathers harmonized their way through the founding of America in this musical adapted from a popular Broadway show. Colonial representatives gather in Philadelphia with the aim of establishing a set of governmental rules for the burgeoning United States. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams charged Thomas Jefferson with the work of writing a statement announcing the new country's emancipation from British rule. So yeah.
Very, very good.
um, so why don't you tell me a little bit about your history with this movie? When did you first see it?
Well, I have a vague recollection of actually seeing it when it first came out. I was very young, but it was G-rated and it was educational, so it's absolutely the kind of movie that my parents would take me and my brother and sister to see. And like I said, I vaguely remembered some of the songs from it, and I also remember the New York abstains running gag. I totally remember seeing that when I was a kid. But my next memory of it was a little bit stronger because we watched the movie in school in junior high in seventh grade as part of our history
That makes
class.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, they didn't have VHS yet at those times, so we probably watched it on 16 millimeter. It's a long movie, so they canceled classes for the afternoon and had all the whole grade go down to the auditorium to watch it in one fell swoop. And I remember the teacher, giving a little speech ahead of time. It was corresponding with what we were studying at the time, but he was pointing out things to look for that would be on the test, like the triangle trade and things like that. And
Well, this
then
was my first time seeing it.
Was it? Oh my God. I was kind of
Yeah.
curious about that. Okay. And then my next memory of it, of course, is when I was a senior in high school, we actually did the play and I was in it. So
Oh, which part did you play?
I was actually cast as Robert Livingston from New York. He's one of the guys on the committee to draft the Declaration. So he's in the song But Mr. Adams. He's going home to Papa Cork.
Ah.
But then the guy playing North Carolina, who always yields to South Carolina, for some reason had to drop out of the show. And so they took the guy who was playing Lewis Morris, they gave him to North Carolina, and then they combined Morris. Morris is the other guy from New York. Since Morris and Livingston were both from New York, they combined them and let me do both parts. So I got to celebrate in Papa Cork and I got to abstain courteously.
That's funny. Well, I don't know. I'm curious as to why my school didn't like show this. Although I will say for you seeing this as a kid, it's kind of a long movie for a kid.
Yeah. Well,
It's
it
like
was
2 hours and
shorter.
45 minutes, I think.
It was shorter when it first came out. I don't know if you listened to any of
Oh,
the
really?
commentaries. Oh, yeah.
I did not know
So,
that. Okay. So I just thought I was like, wow, that's a lot to show kids in a classroom. I feel like they'd have to really sit still.
yeah, if you listen to any of the commentaries, you'll find out that it was about 40 minutes were cut before the premiere. Against the
Wow.
director's knowledge. The director felt that he had locked the picture. He went on vacation to Europe, and when he came back for the premiere, 40 minutes were gone. This is all because of Jack Warner, the producer. So,
Mm,
so Jack Warner, he had he was notorious for cutting movies down to make them shorter so they could, the running time shorter so they could get more performances per day so they can get more screenings per day, make more money. So that was one
makes
problem.
sense.
He was patriotic. He loved the musical, but there were always things that bothered him about it. And he came
Mm,
in the first day for the table read with a list of notes that he wanted changed, and they basically made the movie. They filmed the play pretty much more than any other movie musical adaptation or stage musical adaptation to the movie.
really? I was curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you watch the movie, you're pretty much seeing it's more of a translation than an adaptation. It's just,
Huh.
okay, this is how we did it on stage where we had the proscenium and we were stuck with, being on one location. Now we have cameras, we can move the camera around, we can go outside, but pretty much it's scene for scene, it's it's the play. And it's the same
Wow.
director as the play. It's the same well, the screenwriter is the guy who wrote the book for the play.
Mhm.
Most of the cast is the same. That's why a lot of them aren't very famous. A lot of them have no other IMDb credits because they were stage actors.
Wow.
And and even the costume designer was the same. The hairstylist for the wigs was the same. Everything they just brought the whole company over to Burbank to film this.
Interesting.
And the reason for that was Jack had produced My Fair Lady, and he
Mhm.
got a lot of flack for not going with Julie Andrews, who had created the role of Eliza Doolittle on stage, but she wasn't a movie star yet. So he put
Mhm.
Audrey Hepburn in the role because he needed a name. And then the same year, Julie Andrews goes and makes Mary Poppins and wins the Academy Award. and Audrey Hepburn doesn't even get nominated because it had come out that she wasn't doing her own singing. She was good in the role, but she's not even a singer. So
Right. We
so
actually
Jack,
talked about that because we did an episode on My
I
Fair Lady
remember,
too,
yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Jack didn't want to make the same mistake twice. So he called a press conference to announce that he was making the movie, and the director of the play was there just as a courtesy. And when the press asked who was going to direct it, or he thought he was there just as a courtesy, and they asked Jack who's going to direct it and who's going to be in it. And he said, "Well, everybody who was in it on Broadway, and the director from the Broadway's the stage, they're going to do it." That was how Peter Hunt found out he was going to get to make his first movie. He
Oh,
had wanted to
wow.
make a movie, but he didn't think that they were going to let him. So,
That is crazy. Yeah, you don't
so
hear about that a whole lot. Like, with a lot of musicals, it seems like they kinda shake things up and do whatever they
yeah,
think is best
yeah.
instead
There's
of
no new songs
yeah.
added for Academy consideration. There's only one minor song that was cut from the full version. I mean, we'll talk about what was cut later on, but uh, there was. But the main point of the play and of the movie is to make the founding fathers seem more human and relatable. The prior to this play, you didn't have plays about important historical figures where you showed that they'd like to get drunk and they complained about flies and they had sex drives and stuff like that. There's a lot of
Yeah, it is kinda jarring in some ways. You're like, "Oh,
Yeah, so
didn't
they wanted to
expect that."
humanize. That was the whole point. And Jack Warner, while he wanted to do this for patriotic reasons, he always had a problem with that. He didn't understand that that was the point, or he understood, he just didn't like that aspect of it. So a lot of
Oh,
his cuts
interesting.
were anytime, almost everything with the Delaware colony, because they're always bickering among themselves. And he thought, well,
Mm.
that makes them look silly and foolish, and we should respect them. They're our founding fathers. So he cut almost everything with the Delaware convention and a lot of other things. But the main cut was Cool, Cool, Considerate Men because that was considered a making fun of the conservatives. And Jack was a conservative, and he was friends with President Nixon, who was president at the time, and they had performed the play at the White House. But it took them a year to negotiate it because the White House had asked them to cut Cool, Cool, Considerate Men and Mama Look Sharp, which was considered an anti-Vietnam War protest song. And the people who made the play refused to make those cuts. So it took them a year to
Hmm.
finally get the White House to agree to let them come and do the whole play. So when the movie comes out and Jack takes a cut over to Nixon, and again, Nixon says, "Can you cut this song from the movie?" And Jack agreed. And so, along with the other cuts, he made that big lift to the 8-minute song that was the centerpiece of the whole movie. And he never told Peter about it. So,
Wow.
where it really gets interesting, though, is I mentioned this when I first proposed doing this, that I had some peripheral involvement in getting the restoration made, and that is back in '90. I think they first announced this for Laserdisc that the VHS version and all the TV versions and the early Laserdisc were all pan and scan, and
Oh, okay.
Peter Hunt made it a point to use the entire widescreen frame. Back in those days, they would have little lines on the in the camera lens on the viewfinder to show you where the TV safe area was, to make sure that you kept all the important action in an area that would still be visible when they showed it on TV, and you cut off the sides. Peter Hunt felt that he needed to keep the action visually alive because he was so, the movie itself is straitjacketed by being stuck in this one room with 50 men, and so
Mhm.
he wanted to make sure that he played the whole screen. He kept everything on, used the entire frame, including all the sides, so that when you see the pan and scan version, it's terrible.
Oh,
So
no.
so back in the day, before the World Wide Web and before internet browsers like Netscape and stuff, there was CompuServe and AOL. And on CompuServe, they had this forum, the Consumer Electronics Forum, which had a section for Laserdisc fans. And one of the moderators of that forum was a guy named Mark Willage, who was a telecine operator. He was the guy that does all the color timing and color correction when they make a transfer from film to tape or whatever the new medium is. And he would regularly go on and announce that these are the things I'm working on this month, so that we would know what favorite movies were coming out, and we could save our money and get all excited. And pretty much every title that he mentioned would get somebody would respond, "Oh, yay! I'm so glad for that." But 1776 got an inordinate amount of response. Everybody was excited about
Mhm.
that, and everyone was well, Mark in particular was surprised because he'd never seen the movie until he worked on it, and he hated it. Uh,
Oh,
and he was
wow.
shocked. He was shocked to see that so many people were enthused about it, were excited about it. And in addition to that excitement for having a letterbox transfer, and that's all that was announced, was going to be letterbox for the first time. A lot of fans knew that it had been recorded in stereo but released in mono because the soundtrack album was in stereo. So they knew at least the songs existed in stereo. So they were bugging Mark, "Hey, it should be in stereo. Tell them to get it in stereo. Will it be in stereo? We want stereo." So he went back to his boss and said, "You're never going to believe everybody wants to see this," and they wanted it in stereo. So they went to Columbia Records archives to get the original stereo masters, and it was all in separate pieces and stuff. And they're listening to the orchestral track for Piddle, Twiddle, and Resolve, and they can hear the vocal bleed through. And they hear that John Adams is singing verses that were in the play but were not in the movie, that they didn't know. They
Hmm.
never knew that there was a longer version of that song recorded because it's not on the soundtrack either.
Oh,
And
wow.
so they start looking for, maybe there's more footage as well. Maybe it was shot that way. And they go to I guess the vaults at Columbia Pictures, and they're looking for footage. The first piece of footage they find is a shot of Thomas Jefferson sitting at the window looking out at some children playing on the lawn, playing soldiers on the lawn, and while John Adams is reading a quote from, sorry about that, can you hear my
No,
dog?
it's okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
John Adams is reading a quote from Tom Paine's Common Sense, and this was not in the play, but the director just wanted to open that up and show how, give a little glimpse of the regular people out there that the decisions of the congressmen were going to affect. Um, and so that was their first indication that there was more to the movie than they knew existed. So then they called Peter Hunt and they said, "Hey, we found this footage. It's not in the play. It's not in the movie. What's going on?" And that's the first time they found out about Cool Men being deleted because of Nixon.
Oh, wow.
So then they ended up
Man.
postponing the release for a year while they went out and they found as much footage as they can. So when Jack was so Jack Warner was one of the founders of Warner Brothers. But by the time they
Okay.
made 1776, all of the early studio moguls had been pushed out of the business by their boards of directors, and the studios had
Mhm.
become more distributors of independently produced pictures. So there were no studio moguls, and Jack was one of those. So he independently produced 1776 for Columbia. But when he was the head of Warner Brothers, if he made cuts to a movie, he never wanted to be second guessed, so he would order the editor to destroy the negatives of the scenes that he cut. He didn't. I don't think he knew that there would be a home video medium one day where there would be restored director's cuts, but somehow he knew he didn't want anybody to do that with his movies. So if you get
Interesting.
he did the same thing with A Star Is Born,
Mhm.
if the Judy Garland version from 1954. And if you get the restored version of that, it's not fully restored. They have, again, about 30, 40 minutes of scenes where they only have the audio still existing, and they put in production stills on the video. So that's the closest we can
Wow.
get to a finished version of A Star Is Born right now. But that was because he owned the studio. So when he ordered somebody to destroy the negatives, they destroyed the negatives. When he was an independent producer and he ordered somebody to destroy the negatives on 1776, the editor said, "I think somebody's going to want to see this later." And she took it home with her and hid it in her house for 20 years.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so I mean, like, he has a motive for wanting that
Hmm.
not to be released. It's not like he's making a business decision with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. It's
and they can
really
tell that
crazy.
that it's just a personal motivation. Wow.
So, yeah.
That is really interesting. So I really took for granted how the length of the
Go
movie.
ahead.
I didn't realize that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, so and I didn't know any of that. I only had seen the TV version, of course, until the Laserdisc finally came out. And there's a really good commentary on that where they talk all about most of what I told you is in that, except
Mhm.
the part about CompuServe. They didn't mention that specifically.
And for our younger listeners, man, some of you probably don't even know what a laser disc is.
Or CompuServe.
But yeah, but this was before VHS, so
Mhm.
or not before, but was it before or around the same time as?
Technically, yes. Laserdisc was invented before VHS. It came out. It was a very small niche market. I
Yeah.
actually, by accident, met. I had a friend in college, and it turned out that his father was on the team at RCA that invented the Laserdisc, and he told me that they did studies that most people, they were trying to see if they could sell this to the average family, and there was no such thing as sell through home video yet. And they
Mhm.
said that most families would just watch a movie 4 times if they owned it at most, and then they'd never watch it again. So they never were enthused about pushing that as a format. Um, and then sell through video really started. Then the Betamax came about, and then the VHS came after Betamax, and at first that was all just for people to time shift and record off of TV and watch it later and skip past the commercials. It wasn't a sell-through medium really until Top Gun came out on the original Top Gun came out on VHS at sell-through prices, but they had to put a Pepsi ad at the beginning in order to keep the price low enough to sell millions of copies.
Interesting. Wow, the things we take for granted now. Yeah, in fact, you know, I guess people sitting at home can think of Betamax as like, when there was HD and Blu-ray.
Right? Yeah.
Like, it was kinda like that. VHS went out, but yeah, like, it was a controversial idea to watch movies at home. Some directors did not like that idea, like Steven
Yeah.
Spielberg, which is why E.T. was so delayed for so long in
Right.
terms of, like, people a little bit younger than me liking it.
Yeah, he's
Um,
also opposed
when it
to
went to DVD, yeah.
yeah, Spielberg's also opposed to Netflix movies getting Oscar consideration. So
This is true. But it's funny because, like, we give a lot of flack to directors like, what's his name? Nolan, who, like, is,
oh yeah,
basically would just have a meltdown at the idea of you watching one of his films on your iPhone. But it's like,
yeah,
the further you get away from when that idea first comes out, the more you realize that things have to change.
right,
But yeah, Laserdisc, I mean, the appeal to them was that they were much better quality than VHS, but that price tag and
yeah,
also the skipping, the same issue you have with like a record player with
yeah,
records, you would have with Laserdisc, they skipped easily.
right. It
So,
was an
and
analog
some of you are
format.
young enough to remember, or I guess old enough to remember, like DVDs kind of had some issues as well with
Yeah.
skips.
Well, it's interesting. The video for the Laserdisc was analog. I mean, it was read by a laser, so it was different than a vinyl record. But the audio, initially the audio was analog too, but then they perfected the digital audio. So the Laserdisc was the first medium to come out with digital audio, and that
Oh,
preceded
wow.
the compact disc.
Wow, that's surprising. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I just remember I worked at a Suncoast store and they had a
Ooh.
Laserdisc section. And like if you were a
Oh
real
wow, I remember
cinephile,
that store.
yeah, if you were a real cinephile, you preferred Laserdisc even back
Mhm.
then because they were better quality. But again, they had their issues.
It was better
Um,
quality. It was also the first medium where they regularly letterboxed the movies because they knew that
oh, really?
the Laserdisc medium was intended for the cinephile, for the movie enthusiast, and they wanted it. Also, when I mentioned that they added the digital audio track, once they did that, they realized they didn't. If everybody had upgraded their Laserdisc player, and that was easy to do because it wasn't such a large market, so that they had the new ones that were capable of playing the digital audio track, then they still had the analog audio track. They didn't need to duplicate it. That's why they came up with the idea of putting an audio commentary because they had this extra audio track that nobody
Oh,
needed.
wow.
So they invented
Huh.
the audio commentary.
I did not know that. I'm learning all kinds of stuff today. Well, you have so many good facts. I only have 3 that I wanted
Oh,
to
okay.
share about this movie. The first one was that while it's generally accepted that John Hancock was the only one to sign the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, Sherman Edwards and Peter Stone chose to have the congressional delegates sign the document on that date in the musical for dramatic effect.
Yes.
Hopefully people at home know that. But, I don't know, this could be a, little history lesson for you.
Hello.
The Broadway musical was actually conceived by a history teacher, which isn't
Hmm.
that surprising.
Yeah.
um, Also, William Daniels, who later appeared on Boy Meets World, played George Feeney, principal of John Adams High
Hmm.
School in
Oh,
Philadelphia, PA.
yeah. He was the star of St. Elsewhere, and I'd never watched that show, but I'm told that there were a lot of little Easter egg references to John Adams in that as well.
Oh, I don't think I've ever seen St. Elsewhere, but
Yeah, neither have I. So,
interesting. Well, yeah, I remember when I was watching this at home, I was looking at him a lot, and I was like, man, he sure looks and sounds extremely familiar. And then I didn't even look it up. I went, that's Feeney. Like, I
hmm,
just know
hmm,
it's him because he's just plays such a lovable, such a positive teacher, on Boy Meets World. Like, as maybe you watch it a lot, or maybe you didn't watch it, depending
yeah,
on your age when it comes out, you may not have seen it a whole lot, or maybe you've never seen it before at all if you're listening to this. But I can't say I was like a huge fan of the show. I think I was more partial to Wonder Years, which,
hmm.
if you're wondering
Me
why I'm
too.
saying that, if
Yeah.
you're a little bit younger than me, Wonder Years preceded this. It was, Fred Savage, and then his, younger brother is in Boy Meets World. Very different shows, different
Yeah.
tones. And I was more partial to the Wonder Years because that's what I grew up with. But even as little as I saw Boy Meets World, I always enjoyed William Daniels as the
Hmm,
teacher because I thought it was cool that there was a teacher that, he could be a little bit of a foil sometimes, but he just had such a quick wit. And I think
hmm,
the actor still does to this day. And he's
hmm.
just so lovable as kind of a stiff guy. And so I think he really stands out. So as little as I watch that show, when I'm watching this movie, and as different as he looks by the 80s, I like automatically knew who that was.
Well, it's
So,
interesting that you mentioned that you recognize his voice because a lot of people would recognize his voice as Kit, the voice of the car in Knight Rider.
oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't see Knight Rider as much. That one was a little bit before
Yeah.
my time. So I had a better shot of seeing Boy Meets
Right.
World. But again, Boy Meets World was almost too young for me
Hmm,
by the time it came out. Um, but yeah, I mean, he has a very recognizable voice. And I do think you're right. Knight Rider is probably the bigger thing. But
hmm.
these days, at least fairly recently, he was in the convention circuit,
Yeah.
as Mr. Feeney, going around signing autographs and taking
Yeah.
pictures with people. And a lot of people around my
Yeah.
age or a little younger, like, loved
Yeah.
that show. So,
And
but I'm
older
sure there's got to be
people,
some great Knight Rider fans as well,
yeah,
obviously.
older audiences would also remember he was Dustin Hoffman's father in The Graduate. I don't know. Have you ever done that
Oh
on the
my gosh,
show?
how did I forget that? I've done that movie on here. Like, I've seen that movie more than once too. Oh
Yeah.
well. I guess I was going with the most recent thing I had seen him
Right.
in.
Right. Well,
But
I mean,
yeah,
as long as
that's
we're talking
true.
about the cast, Ken Howard, who plays Jefferson, also a very well-known character actor. I think younger audiences might remember him now from 30 Rock. He played the guy who owned the cable company that bought NBC.
Oh my gosh, I think I'd have to see it again. I
Yeah.
loved that show though. I miss that show sometimes.
Yeah.
So good.
And let's see what else. Who else did you
Yeah,
like in the cast?
I mean, I thought, Howard Da Silva plays kind of an adorable version of Benjamin Franklin.
Hmm.
Like, everybody is sort of romanticized, obviously. Like, they just, like you said, they're trying to make them seem more human and easy to connect with. And so he kind of plays this kind of doting, kind of goofier version of Benjamin
Yeah.
Franklin. But I think you need, because it's such a serious topic, and I mean, really, like you said, it's mainly like in a courtroom, which isn't super exciting for a musical. You can
Hmm.
see why they kind of tweak their personalities a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's a musical comedy. It's intended to be charming, but it does get pretty serious toward the end. But
Yes, yes.
yeah, I mean, there's different levels of realism. Obviously, did you ever see the HBO miniseries John Adams with Paul Giamatti?
I didn't. I
Oh,
like
that's
that's one of those shows that I kept meaning to watch, and then there's just so much content now. It's like so hard to
it
keep
is.
up with
It's
everything.
long.
But
But
I've heard it's really good.
it is really good, and of course that's a whole different level of realism. That's like what we would expect to see in any movie today. Whereas 1776 really does look like the play because that's what it was.
Mhm.
But there was Martha Jefferson played by Blythe Danner. Do you recognize her?
Mm, I mean, she's beautiful, but I didn't
She
recognize her right off the
was
bat. For me,
she
Feeney was,
was
like, the only one I
okay.
recognized.
Well, Blythe Danner was in Meet the Parents and Meet the Fockers. That whole franchise. I
Oh,
like.
okay,
She was the
okay.
mother,
I
yeah.
could see that.
And she also played Will's mother on Will and Grace. And
Oh,
in
man,
real
that's a
life,
throwback too.
yeah,
Haven't watched that in a
and in
while.
real life, she is the mother of Gwyneth Paltrow.
I did see that in the notes,
Yes.
and that she was, like, pregnant during
She
this?
might
Is
have
that
been. I
right?
did the math because the movie wrapped in December, and Gwyneth was born in the following September. So so maybe, yeah, maybe a little bit pregnant.
Yeah, maybe really early on. That is an interesting connection. I don't think I realized that Gwyneth Paltrow was, like, Hollywood royalty like that.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, most of the others not too famous. William Dewell, who plays McNair, was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Um, let's see, Howard Da Silva. Yeah, I didn't recognize, but he was in two different versions of The Great Gatsby, but neither of them were the most recent one. So,
Wow,
and
okay.
yeah, Stephen Nathan, who plays the courier, he's a writer producer for Bones and Joan of Arcadia. The first thing he did right after 1776, he was in a very hard to find movie called The First Nudie Musical with Cindy Williams from Laverne and Shirley, and so Ron Howard actually has a cameo in that.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. The guy that played Lewis Morris from New York was in Hogan's Heroes.
Oh, man, my friend Kara loved Hogan's Heroes. We used to argue about, like, I preferred MASH and she preferred Hogan's Heroes. Not that they're the same kind of shows, but they were
Yeah.
both military, I guess. But she would always, like, say, "I don't like MASH, it's depressing. I like Hogan's Heroes." I'm like, "That's a pretty different show, but okay."
Yep. I should
But
also
for us, I
mention,
think by the time we saw them on TV, they were, like,
that,
back to back. Like, I
yeah,
remember the lineup
yeah.
being like that.
One is silly and one is trying to be a little bit like bittersweet serious.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. As long as we're talking about the cast, I should also mention Blythe Danner's one of the few people who was not in the original Broadway cast. On Broadway, her part was played by Betty Buckley, and it was Betty
Mhm.
Buckley's first role. I think like it was the week she arrived in New York to become an actress, and she overheard about that audition, and she got there, and it was the first part she booked. And I think she won the Tony
Wow.
Award. Of course, she went on to Cats and a million other shows. So, and she's still working.
Wow.
And well, and this is also not related to the movie, but in my high school version, the guy that played our John Adams, he continues to work as an actor now. His name is Jeff Sumner. He did play the genie in the Aladdin show at Disneyland for I think its entire run, like 8 years or so.
Oh, wow.
So if you've been to Disneyland, you might have seen him. Also has credits for Desperate Housewives, Ugly Betty, and shows like that. So
So a lot of talent in this
yeah.
cast.
Yeah, and adjacent cast. Also, I don't know if you knew this, but there was a revival in maybe 2005, and Brent Spiner from Star Trek played Adams.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. I did not know that.
I actually just listened to that cast album for the first time. It's actually pretty good.
Oh, okay. I'll have
And
to
for
check
me,
that out.
when I'm used to hearing songs a certain way and then I hear it a new way with a new cast, I sometimes have a problem with that. I didn't at all. I thought they added a lot to it that was pretty clever.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. Yeah. Well, now I guess since we've kind of gone over the cast a little bit, do you want to talk about some of your favorite scenes or songs from the film?
Yeah, I mean, I might as well start with But Mr. Adams because that was the scene that had my solo in it. What I like about that is, so I mentioned that I took this musical theater workshop, and this is a great example of a song that moves the story forward. At the beginning of the
Mhm.
song, you have all your characters, they don't want to write the declaration, and by the end of the song they've solved that problem, reluctantly forcing Jefferson to be the one to write it. So it's a great song for that purpose, and that it moves the story forward. It's not just a song to express how people feel about what was just happening. And
Mhm.
also because it's, like I said before, it's educational. I mean, if
Right.
I had read a textbook in school about who were the five men assigned to the the committee for the Declaration, I might have memorized their names long enough to pass the test, but I wouldn't remember it 30 years later. But their names are in the song, so it's like this movie is although it has so many inaccuracies, you still do learn a lot that I
Yeah,
don't think you would learn otherwise. I mean, songs really make things, and entertainment make things fun to remember for me.
right. Totally agree.
And it's one of the few numbers. There's not a lot of choreography in this movie, but that one has a lot of fun choreography where they're passing the quill pen back and forth, and also, you know, Peter Hunt on the commentaries talks a lot about how accurately they recreated every detail of Independence Hall. I've never been there, but I looked at some of the pictures of it online. It especially that little foyer with the staircase. It is spot on. It is exactly how you see it in the movie. It's
Wow,
amazing.
that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I guess I don't know, sets would be really I mean, sets are always important in any movie, but I feel
Mhm.
like, in musicals they're like one of the characters too, and so it's
Yeah, and
important that
until I
that
heard him talking about how accurate it was, I looked at it and I said, "Oh, that's just a set. They just put up some walls." No, they researched it very heavily. They found out exactly what kind of paint was used, and they found the manufacturer, and they got the same paint that was used in Independence
Wow.
Hall to paint the sets. It's amazing. They actually found out some of their research. Knott's Berry Farm in California had done a replica of Independence Hall before them, and so they borrowed some of their research. So,
Oh, interesting. I've
yeah.
been to Knott's Berry Farm, but I think it's been a
Oh,
long
cool.
time. I think I've been there, but if I was, it was like like under the age of 4.
Yeah, I don't think I've been there at all. I like the Abigail songs, "Yours, Yours, Yours," "Till Then," and "Compliments." Um, Lovely songs. A lot of those lyrics, as well as "Is Anybody There?" A lot of the lyrics are almost nearly direct quotes from letters that they actually wrote back and forth to each
That's nice.
other. Again, it's something that and you could, if you enjoy this entertainment, and you listen to the cast album, and like you would a regular album, and you get to know the songs, you're memorizing a piece of history. You're not just
Mhm.
hearing a cute pop song. So I think
That's
that's
true.
really cool.
Yeah.
And the compliments. So her songs. So her first song is she's doing part of Piddle Twiddle, but then they go into Till Then, which introduces that yours, 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 and the saltpeter pins, and then we have the whole yours, yours, yours song um, after Miss Martha Jefferson comes there. And then finally, in compliments, we get the third version of that, where it's a big triumphant. She's sending the saltpeter to him. It's great. I love the big swell. That's one of the few moments that movie has that big swelling music crescendo kind of a thing. So
Mhm.
that's always fun for me. And Is Anybody There is another one. Like I said, John Adams really did predict that we would be celebrating Independence Day every year with fireworks and parades. Uh,
Wow.
Again, most of those lyrics are almost direct quotes from his letters.
Interesting. I don't think I realized watching I mean, I always assume that musicals are not very historically accurate, but I didn't realize how much of it was pulled from direct quotes, so that's really cool.
I know it's funny because the guy who I told you he did the transfer, and he said he didn't like the movie. I remember saying in the forum, I said, "But it's so accurate." And he goes, "Oh, really? Were they singing and dancing in Congress?" But no, but this was true and this was true, and a lot of people don't
Yeah, I
realize that.
think like you're saying, it doesn't hurt to make the facts accessible to a wider audience so that they can
Yeah,
appreciate them easier, like, there's no sin in that, you know?
yeah. The one thing that John Adams got wrong was he thought that we would be celebrating Independence Day on the July 2nd, because that is the date that they had
Oh.
the vote. And you're right when you said before the signing didn't take place on July 4th. Hancock's signature may have actually been on July 5th. We don't know for sure. Um, the end of the movie, the last shot of the movie, is inspired by a famous painting by John Trumbull, which is on the back of the $2 bill. Um, and it's called the Declaration of Independence. Most people mistakenly believe that it's the signing, but there never was a time when all 56 signers were in the same room at the same time. There was a lot of coming and going in Congress, and
Mm,
that
that makes
painting.
sense.
That painting is a scene that also didn't really happen with everybody there, but it was a painting of the delivery of the Declaration and the reading of it from the printer. So,
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
but
I
every
mean, that's a lot of people to gather from all over the states
yeah,
at a time when transportation was not
but
convenient.
but everybody imagines that that's how it was signed, and so that's how they ended the movie, and it is a great ending.
Yeah. Right, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a movie and a musical, so they have to make it, like, visually satisfying even if it's not exactly how it happened.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I found in doing additional research for this was that the vote was never contingent on any changes to the Declaration. They voted on the
Oh, really?
proposal on yeah, on July 2nd, and then they started the debate on what to change and omit and so forth. And then they
Okay,
sent it to the printer. That's why it may not have gotten back from the printer until the 5th.
I see, but then in the movie, they wanna make it seem more dramatic,
Yeah,
so
it's way
yeah.
more dramatic. You know, I think I mentioned last week to you that you know, I needed a little extra time to rewatch the movie, but maybe I don't really need it because I've seen it so many times. Well, when I watched it again, I was surprised. I have seen it so many times. I don't watch it every 4th of July anymore because I've seen it so many times. But when I rewatched it this time, I did find myself getting hooked up in it again. You know, like it was exciting. I mean, I know obviously I know how it's going to end, but we all do before we go in there. You know,
Sure,
even if we
sure.
haven't seen it. So the machinations of how the voting changes. You know, the tally board didn't exist in the real Independence Hall. That was something that Peter Stone, the writer, invented, so that the
Mm,
audience in the theater at any point could keep track of where we were, how close we were to
yeah.
independence. And we don't see it as much in the movie version as you could on stage, because on stage you can look at it at any point. And here we only
Oh,
get to
that's
see it
true,
when, yeah,
yeah.
here we only get to see it when the director shows it to us. But still, what I notice is, you know, the Dark Night of the Soul, when after Rutledge's song, the Molasses Drum, and the whole South walks out. At that moment, it's 7-5 with one abstention. And so they don't even have a majority anymore or a tie anymore, let alone unanimity. And there's like a half hour left in the movie. How are they ever going to get that declaration signed? And that was the big problem that Peter Stone had to solve, was everyone goes to the play or the movie knowing that they're going to sign the declaration on July 4th. How do we make them believe it's not going to happen? So you get there, it's a half hour left, and there's no chance that they're going to win. The first thing that happens is Maryland comes back from New Jersey. He goes into the yay column for the first time. So now it's back
Mm,
to 6-6. And then that night, Georgia, Lyman Hall comes in, and he's, "Oh, I've been thinking about it, and this guy from British Parliament said this one thing, and I agree with it, so I'm going to go ahead into the A." So Georgia is in the A column for the first time, and that leaves us with the big four. We've got Delaware, which has been set up throughout the whole play and the movie again, where there's this three-way battle. The two of them are for it, but one of them is sick and he's been sent away. They have to go get him back, so that gets resolved. Then we have the two Carolinas, and we know what the big issue is there. And once that's
yeah.
resolved, North Carolina is in. Then we get the brilliant Pennsylvania thing, completely fabricated, almost completely fabricated. So for the play, but it's still brilliant. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
uh, Wilson, they call him a judge. He in real life he wasn't a judge at that time. He later became a judge and
Oh,
was one of the first Supreme Court justices, but that wasn't the case in 1776. He wasn't. He was always in favor of. He was. He mentored under Dickinson, so he was kind of the sycophant of Dickinson and would do what he said. But he was very pro independence, and
hmm,
he wouldn't officially vote that way until he could make sure that that's what his constituents wanted. There was
yeah.
another guy in Pennsylvania who was the swing vote, who did change his vote at the last second, but it wasn't Wilson. But one thing I learned when I was in high school, and they combined those two parts, was how tight the script was. It's known for having the longest book scene in Broadway history in a musical. So what I mean by a book scene is in a musical you have your music and lyrics and your songs, and then everything else that's written is the script, but they call it a book. So that would be not only the dialogue, but also the characters and the scenes and the scene structure and the whole concept is the book writer. So, but all your scenes that don't have music in it, it's a book scene. and that
Oh,
scene
okay.
3 in the play, it's a 30-minute scene without a song, and they told them before they
Oh.
opened, no one will sit through that, but they needed to set everything up. So when we
Mhm.
combined the two New York parts, we had a dilemma because Livingston is one of the 5 men who was on the committee to draft the Declaration, and his name is in the song. So I had to be Livingston, but Livingston wasn't one of the signers. He ended up leaving
Huh.
Congress before it was finished. He sent his cousin Philip Livingston to sign it, but that would have probably been confusing to combine the two of them. So they they had, I think they just decided we're going to break New York into two parts. And then you see that there's at least one character for every colony, but the colonies that need more have more. Pennsylvania has three because they need it for that tiebreaker vote. Delaware has
Yeah.
three, they need it for the tiebreaker vote. And that's when I realized how tight the writing is. It seems like it's, you know, unwieldy. There's so much dialogue, so many votes, and trying to keep track of it. But as much as they tried to cut down on that long book scene, they couldn't. Everything needed to be there. It's all setting up throughout the play. They're setting up how much Wilson is in Dickinson's shadow, and nobody listens to him. They're setting up how Delaware is fighting amongst themselves, and it all pays off in the end. It's just so
Mhm.
tightly written.
Yeah, wow, I didn't realize that, all those combining of characters and stuff, but that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah,
like you
because
said, to
each
move the
in
plot
reality,
forward.
there's 56 signers. Each colony had multiple people there in Congress, and some of them at different times. But they weren't going to put 56 people on the stage. Some
For
of them,
sure.
for the movie version, they did add a lot more in the background. I don't know if it's a full 56, but there are additional delegates from each colony in the background. Um,
Yeah.
I just I just noticed there's one where Bartlett, I think, when they're asking for corrections, and the guy who makes the first correction, he says, in your document you said this, this, and this," and you see he's getting the his notes from his colleague. You know,
Mhm.
that's one of the few cases where you see one of these background people actually do something. But they didn't give him names, they didn't give him lines or anything, but they just peopled it out so it looks more realistic.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want it to seem like a full room.
Mhm. How about you? What were some of your favorite scenes?
I think I liked, the scenes where, there's, like, that song with, Benjamin, John Adams, and
The egg.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yes, that's
Well,
a great.
actually, I was thinking of the one with, Martha
Oh,
Jefferson.
oh, right. Okay, yeah, right.
I thought that was a nice scene and, like, whimsical and, like, fun.
Yeah, again, one of the few. The choreographies is in But Mr. Adams. He plays the violin, and Cool Man. The rest of it, they're, the Mama Look Sharp. The guy is just sitting there in the middle of the stage. The egg is just the three founding fathers sitting
Mhm.
and singing to the camera, basically.
Yeah, that was a fun song though,
Yeah,
too.
it's a fun song, and it's because it's a fun song that can survive such a static shot. I mean, it's not totally static.
Yeah,
The camera's circling them a little bit, but you couldn't do that if the song wasn't good enough to carry that scene. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're right. He plays the violin, it livens it up. We get some female perspective in there. There's a lot of sexual innuendo in that song. Um,
Yeah.
Here's another fact that I learned from the play is that Martha Jefferson died young. There's the last verse of the song
Oh.
is "When Heaven Calls to Me, Sing Me No Sad Elegy." That's there because she did die very young, very shortly after that, and she was dead before Jefferson was president. So the
Oh,
history
wow.
books had always listed Martha Jefferson as first lady, but they're referring to their daughter Martha Jefferson, who took on the duties of the first lady. Jefferson never remarried
Oh, wow.
because he was with Sally Hemings, and they probably couldn't legally get married.
Right. Yeah.
Which, by the way, brings us to the slavery issue. I think that was
Yeah.
another thing that Peter Hunt says that when they did the play, they heard from a lot of people who said that until they saw that play, they didn't realize that the slavery issue was being debated that early, and that's
Yeah, I feel like when you look in the history books, like, I mean, part of that too is because Europe had such a different opinion of slavery than we did here
Mhm.
in the US. You know, it was like way past not cool and was like a big issue and was something that, you know, needed to be obviously for obvious reasons discussed and talked about and stuff.
Mhm.
And, you know, unfortunately didn't you know, get overturned here. But yeah, it makes sense that it would have been debated even back then.
Yeah, I mean, and they're not making excuses. They are saying, look, you know, we might not have really been able to get the nation started at all if we, you know, tried to fix everything at the start. And you know, it's sad, but that's the way it happened. But at the same time, you know, the musical isn't really letting them off the hook. That song "Molasses Jeronim" is really hitting the anti-slavery people hard, the Northerners hard. It's saying you're you know you're hypocrites. You're part of this too. You're profiting from it. You know,
Hmm.
when the one guy gets up in the middle of the song and says, "For the love of God, Mr. Rutledge, please," it's because you know he's hammering them so bad, saying how participatory they are in the evil. You know,
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of
he's
unavoidable part of
yeah, he
our
gets up on the
history.
desk and he's imitating a slave auctioneer. You know,
Hmm.
those are totally the northern people. It's you know, it's, uh, it's the way it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
it's
you
good that
know,
they touched on it and didn't like I mean, you know, hearing that there's 40 extra minutes and there are some issues that don't paint everybody in the perfect light, like or every state in the perfect light. It's like it's kind of crazy to want to take that stuff out. You know, it's like
yeah,
in today's world, I feel like you would be criticized for removing some of that stuff.
oh yeah, absolutely. And even in well in The Star Is Born, I guess that had been released as a roadshow in its original length. So people,
Hmm.
historians, it wasn't a surprise to know that that had been cut. Everybody knew that it was cut. With 1776, it was done before the premiere. So
Yeah.
the public at large didn't really know that at all, that there was a
Yeah,
longer
that makes
version. The
sense.
people doing the restoration didn't know it, you know.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
all they just announced that they were putting out a letterbox transfer that would be in mono. They you know they thought
Yeah.
people would be excited that it was letterbox, and they were, but they didn't even think to look for stereo, let alone 40 missing minutes.
Hmm.
But I should put so there are 5 different versions now. 3 of them are very similar, though. And I have, you know, we haven't mentioned that just last month, actually May 31st, they released the 50th anniversary version on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. Um,
Wow.
and that
Yeah, I
contains,
remember you telling me about that.
yeah, and so I just got it. And I haven't, you know, watched every little bit of it all. It contains all 5 versions, I think. No, it contains 4 of the 5 versions. So there's the original theatrical cut. It's on on this nude Blu-ray for the first time ever. It's the letterbox one that this is what they would have released on Laserdisc if it hadn't been for our forum on
Mm.
CompuServe. So that's being released for the first time. It's the theatrical cut. You can see the cuts. The Laserdisc cut is also restored here. And it's interesting. It's exactly like it was on the Laserdisc. So what the other thing I love about the Laserdisc cut is that it's not a director's cut. I mean, they told the director, they asked the director, "Hey, what's going on?" And he shared their notes and stuff, his notes with them. But he didn't really see it until he sat down to record the commentary. And what they
Mhm.
ended up doing is they put in every piece of footage they could find, which included things that he actually had intended to cut.
Oh, wow.
So that he had cut before he went away on vacation. So they weren't all Jack Warner cuts. So the Laserdisc cut isn't really a director's cut. It's more of an editor's cut. Well, not even, it's a restorer's cut. It's a first draft of the, you know, a rough version of the director's cut. And
Mhm.
what they did was, I guess, because it had been delayed so long, or maybe the some of the footage was in such bad shape that they didn't do the color correction on the restored footage, but they kept all the stuff that Mark had done on the theatrical cut. So whenever there's a
Oh.
scene where there was a cut by Jack Warner, there's a complete color shift, and anyone could tell. Suddenly, it's got scratches on it. In a couple of places, it's in black and white because all they could find at that time was a black and white work print.
Wow.
Um, and so it's fascinating because as you're watching it, you could see what Jack Warner must have been thinking. Why did he cut this? Why did he cut that? And so they've retained that on this on an extra disc on this new Blu-ray package. You can see how
Hmm.
it looked on Laserdisc now, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool. Um, then there's the DVD cut, which is the first one that's called the director's cut, where he took out the things that were added back that he didn't want in the first place. So that includes there was a reprise of The Lees of Old Virginia, which
Hmm.
was originally in the play because it's such a show-stopping number that the audience is applauding and they want a little bit more of it, so he gives them an extra little coda of it. And that
Hmm.
he said that was really more of a stage convention, and we didn't really need it in the movie, even though they shot it. The original, the two verses of Piddle Twiddle that were what they first heard on the stereo orchestra tracks that made them realize that there was a longer version of that. He cut those back out, so
Oh
you still
wow.
have the short version of Piddle Twiddle. And some of the other big things were there was the Laserdisc version has an overture, uh, intermission music, and exit music, and so much of the 40 minutes was that. So those are not in the director's cut. Um, the first Blu-ray version has, I think, only, as far as I know, it only has one line that's different, and that was so. How did you watch this? Did you watch it streaming or what?
Yeah, I watched it streaming. I rented it in
Okay.
iTunes.
Okay, so there was a line where Hopkins has been out in the outhouse and he missed his vote, and he comes back and he says, "You'd think that Congress could get its own pisser." That's what he says now,
Yeah,
and that's what he said in the play. But in the theatrical version, and in the Laserdisc version, and in the first uh, DVD version,
director's cut. Yeah.
the DVD director's cut, he's the line is, "You'd think Congress would get its own privy." And I
Oh,
don't think,
they kind
yeah,
of
I don't
tried
think they
tried
did that
cleaning
for
up a little bit.
ratings. They might have done it for rating because the original short version was rated G, and the Laserdisc version got a PG. So
Interesting. I guess
it may
just
have been.
mentioning the bathroom at all,
Well,
like in a crude way.
they didn't put the pisser line in the Laserdisc, so that wasn't it. But I mean, all the
Hmm.
sexual innuendo with Jefferson, when you know they're not going to do that in the middle of the day. That might have been enough. You
Yeah, yeah.
know. Then there's I haven't watched it yet, but there's also an extended director's cut that's only a few minutes, so I'm not sure what's different about that. And then is that five? Yeah, I think I've mentioned all five. So there's a lot of different cuts, and then
Wow, I
yeah,
yeah.
it's
I had no
crazy.
idea there were so many different cuts. Although I've only seen this movie one time, so
Yeah, yeah.
oh, that's
Um,
pretty interesting.
yeah.
Were there any other songs that we haven't talked about yet that we wanted to run through?
Let's see. He plays the violin. Let's see. Mama Look Sharp is a great song. That was the song I had to audition with.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, so I remember that pretty well. um, and like I said, it was, when it first came out, it was, the Vietnam War and the draft was going on. It was very obvious that that was a war protest song. By the time the movie came out, Nixon didn't care about that anymore because he had already withdrawn the troops. So
Oh,
so that
interesting.
that was always allowed to stay in. But that was the main thing that Peter Hunt thought was so important was that those two songs were the core of the movie. The conservative standpoint of view. Then how's it affecting people out in the field? People are actually dying. For me, I've never loved Cool Cool Considerate Men all that much. I mean, I don't want it to be
Mhm.
cut, and I certainly don't want it to be cut because the president said so. But but I don't love the song. It's not as hummable to me. But and
Mhm.
also it's anachronistic. They didn't use left and right politics at the time in 1776. That was coined during the French Revolution in 1789, but it didn't make it to America until the 1940s, and it wasn't until the 1960s where it really solidified in its current connotation when we say left and right. And
Gotcha.
knowing
Yeah,
that,
that makes
knowing
sense.
that, I think Nixon was absolutely right. It was clearly making fun of them. At that time, anyone would have known because it was the new modern way to make fun of the opposite side. And when they're
Sure.
saying they're goose stepping like Nazis, saying to the right, ever to the right. So it's clear that Nixon would not have liked that. But
Right, right.
but like I said, with molasses to rum, they're giving it to the other side just as hard. They're
Mhm.
saying, you guys suck too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so at least they kinda did both sides a little bit.
Yeah, it's balanced. I knew I would have a lot to say. So.
Yeah, I feel like I'm glad you're here so you can kind of, I mean, well, it's your episode, but also so you can kinda talk on all that since I've only seen it one time.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to see it live, it's fun. It's going to be pretty much the same. You should go. The
Yeah,
community
yeah, they
theater
should
version,
revive it,
or
especially after, Hamilton being so successful.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing I wanted to say. I did find an interview from 2016 that Playbell did. The program that they give you when you go to see a show. Playbill. They got Lin Manuel Miranda and William Daniels, who plays Adams. They did a joint interview with them, and Miranda is
Oh,
saying,
interesting.
yeah, he's talking all about how 1776 was very influential on Hamilton. He loved.
Mm.
He says, I loved it when the play opens with your hero, your protagonist, being yelled at by the entire company to sit down and shut up. And he knew that Hamilton was also going to be an unlikable protagonist as well. So he
Yeah.
thought, well, great, I can do that too. You know,
Yeah. That's interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Does it still I mean, does this play still tour at all or
Constantly, constantly. I mean,
Okay.
because it's educational, a lot of high schools do it, a lot of community
Mhm.
theaters do it.
Oh, okay.
But as far as the revival, like I said, there was a recent revival with Brent Spiner, and there's always touring companies of it. There was they were planning to do a version with an all-female cast, and that got postponed because of the pandemic. So I don't know where
Oh,
they're at
okay.
with
That would
that,
be
but
interesting.
yeah, I think that's still in the works, and that could be very
Oh, cool.
interesting.
Well, I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions then for you. You've kind of talked about why you enjoy this so much, why you revisit it specifically on July
Mhm.
4th, not every year, but you have
Yeah.
several times. But if you could summarize why do you enjoy this version of this story so much? Why do you like this musical so much?
Yeah, pretty much like I said, it is the musical that I was in. That I sat through weeks of rehearsals, so I got to memorize it like everybody else in the cast, and so it's a huge nostalgia factor. And because it's entertaining and it's educational and it's fun, and
Mhm.
and I am an American, so it's patriotic. And it's the easiest movie to answer this question for is because every year at the 4th of July, there's not many other movies that are about the 4th of July, except maybe that Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot, that's about the Revolutionary War. I mean, I can't really
Mhm.
think about other movies that come close.
I know, I think, like, a funny tongue-in-cheek thing people do every year is watch Independence Day, but
Independence
obviously
Day,
that's
yeah,
not about
not really the same.
not really the same, yeah,
I
but
mean,
that's a good point, there aren't a ton of 4th of July movies, so this could be
National
one that you add
Treasure
to
is
your
another
rotation.
one. National
Oh, yeah,
Treasure with
yeah,
Nicolas
that's true.
Cage because it's about the Declaration, and they also go into a recreation of the set of Independence
Mhm.
Hall. So that's interesting,
Yeah,
and it looks the
that's
same
true.
as it does in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, and now we know it's pretty accurate or
Yeah,
fairly accurate.
yeah.
How would you pitch this to someone that hasn't seen it before? Like, I'm surprised I didn't, but maybe it's because it came out in the '70s? I mean, I don't know why they
Yeah,
never showed it at my school.
it is weird. I think because of the cuts, and also because it came out at a time when musicals were, going out of fashion. That a lot of
Oh,
people
that's true, yeah.
don't know about it because it didn't do well at the box office.
Mm.
In fact, I was looking up it, in the '60s. There were 10 musicals that were nominated for Best Picture, and four of them won. And in 1972, the year this came out, Cabaret was nominated for Best Picture, but it was the last musical nominated for Best Picture until Moulin Rouge 29 years later. So,
Whoa.
yeah,
I'm kinda
musicals
surprised.
were. Go ahead.
Not to hate on Moulin Rouge, but I'm kinda surprised that was nominated.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, Chicago wins the Best Picture. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
that one
but so
I
that's a
understand.
29-year span where musicals just weren't popular. They didn't disappear completely. Grease was the highest grossing movie musical of all time. That came out in
Yeah.
'78. So, but yeah, by and large, musicals had lost their luster, and so I think that's one of the reasons that people didn't see it.
That's
But
true. It's common for people to say stuff like, "I don't watch musicals, I don't like musicals," like,
yeah.
completely discounting the entire genre in a way that they don't do with a lot of other genres.
Mhm. But as far as how I would pitch it, yeah, it's the kind of how you described it at the beginning of the episode. It is the story of how our founding fathers came up with the Declaration of Independence, but it's done in a fun, lighthearted, entertaining musical theater way. Um,
Yeah.
that's educational.
Yeah. Yeah, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. I'm glad that I did, and, thank you again, Danny, for coming on and for picking another movie that, this time a full musical, but
Yeah.
always a movie that has a musical base, so I'll have to have you back soon. Thank you
Next
so
time I will
much.
have to pick something that has no connection to musicals.
That will be your challenge.